This video will help you learn how to match your student learning outcomes to valid assessments. And I'd like to begin with a cartoon in which there are two boys, little boys, talking, and the littler one says, "I taught Stripe the dog how to whistle." And the older boy, whose name is Tiger, says, "I don't hear him whistling." And the little boy retorts, "I said I taught him. I didn't say he learned it." And this cartoon brings to mind a quote by John Wooden. Basically, you haven't taught until your students have learned. So let's begin by looking at what I call curricular architecture. Just like you would not build a house before you have a blueprint set up to ensure that it is what you want, you need to do the same thing with your course. The first step that you need to do is identify what you want your students to know, do, and value, which is informed by your content expertise and or your clinical practice. And once you do that, you may have to adjust as needed due to accreditation requirements if you are in a program in which your students need to be licensed. Then, as you get these strong, robust student learning outcomes, that's when you identify how will you assess that the students have learned what they need to learn as identified in those student learning outcomes. Once you have those two pieces together, strong student learning outcomes, and you've identified valid assessments that will assess those student learning outcomes, then you can start building your course in terms of selecting a textbook, developing your lectures, etc. So let's focus on how do you identify those valid assessments. And we're going to go through 4 examples. The first one is something that we all have learned how to do, but I'm using it as an example to start getting you thinking about how to match those two together. So this very simplistic student learning outcome that we're looking at is students will be able to tie their shoes. So let's look at 4 possibilities of ways that we could show that and see whether you would agree or not agree that these are valid assessments. The first thing you need to do is look at what the action verb is, and the action verb is tie. So now let's look at possibilities. The first one says the teacher shows them how to tie their shoes. Would this meet that student learning outcome to show demonstration of it? And the answer is no, it would not. What about the next one? Students put into sequence the steps of tying their shoes. So they show in pictures or they can put them together in the sequence. Would that show that they can actually tie their shoes? And the answer is no, it doesn't. It just shows that they know the sequence. What about the next one? Students can recognize when a shoe is tied versus not tied. Would that meet the student learning outcome? And no, it would not. So let's look at this last one. The teacher observes students tie their shoes. Would that show evidence that this student learning outcome has been met? And yes, it would, because then the teacher is actually observing the student do it, which is what the student learning outcome is about. So now, after this very fundamental primary example, let's go into some higher education examples. Students will be able to analyze a piece of literature. Let's again identify first the action verb, and it is analyze. So that is key to what we need to be looking for a valid assessment. Let's look at the first one. First possibility, students will write a short essay assessing how the author develops character and setting. Notice, look at this word assessing. When they're assessing something, they're evaluating something, they're analyzing something. So yes, this could be seen as a valid assessment that would show the student learning outcome. Let's look at the other 3 though. Students will take a quiz focusing on checking details from the book. Would that do that? No, that's usually very factual oriented. So no, that would not show that students can analyze because it's just checking details. What about the next one? Students will read a book and write what their favorite part is. It doesn't say that they're analyzing, they're just describing or writing what their favorite part is. So no, this would not meet that student learning outcome. What about the last one? Student will lead a full discussion critiquing a section of a book the class is reading. And you may think, maybe this could do that, but remember, you have to show with the student learning outcome that each and every student, you need to be able to assess whether they've met it. In a full class discussion, you may have some students saying certain things and others may be nodding their head, but that doesn't mean that they can actually analyze it. They're just agreeing, but are they just agreeing to move the discussion along or whatever? It doesn't show that each and every person can analyze it. So this would not meet the criteria of the criterion of a valid assessment to show this student learning outcome. Let's look at the next one. Students will be able to describe what a pharmaceutical compounding is, what pharmaceutical compounding is. The action verb is describe. Let's look at the possibilities. Students will read a chapter. Would that do it? No, not at all. They're not showing anything. They're not describing anything. How about students will have a short answer question, having them define what pharmaceutical compounding entails? Now, if they define it, aren't they also describing it? So yes, this would match and would be a valid assessment for this student learning outcome. What about students will be able to create a pharmaceutical preparation? Well, they could create it, but that's almost higher level than describing. So in a way, there's a mismatch. Even though this is a higher level outcome, it doesn't match the student learning outcome. If you wanted them to be able to create it, then you would have to use that action verb. So no, there is no match here. What about faculty will lecture on pharmaceutical compounding, and hopefully you see that that does not meet it because it's input, not output. Let's go to another one. Students will be able to interpret the health needs of a specific population. The action verb is interpret. Let's look at the possibilities. Students will read a chapter, but they're not doing anything. So no, this would not show that they can interpret. How about in a quiz? Students must match health needs with the specific populations. Matching gives you the feeling that they're identifying, that they already know what the health needs are with each specific population. They're just putting them together. So no, this would not show that they're interpreting in any way. What about students will research a specific population from which they will assess potential health needs? Here they're researching, they're assessing, they must interpret in order to do this. So this would be an appropriate assessment, a valid assessment that would meet the student learning outcome. Let's look at the last one. Faculty member will lecture on the health needs. Hopefully you see that no, this would not meet it. It's an input. It's not. The students do not need to do anything to show that they can interpret. So basically, in summary, the student learning outcome and the assessment must match each other perfectly. The assessment must match what the student learning outcome is indicating. Check those action verbs and make sure they are together. At this point, if you now want to explore what are some assessments that you could use in terms of the wide variety that are available, go to the CETL website on assessing your students and you will be able to see many, many examples. Thank you.